All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So today, what I decided I'm going to do is I'm going to do a series of case studies. Right. I'm going to show you a series of cases that will help you hopefully better understand how you should be looking at your own lab work or the lab work that your doctor is running on you, and to kind of give you a better standard of what to do, right, when you either whether you have symptoms or you're just generally making sure that you're healthy, that everything's in the optimal ranges, etc. So um let me pull up something here. Let me come and let me do this. So all right, so let's look at functional blood test bell curve. See how we can, let's go images. Okay, cool. All right, so in normal blood testing, all right, what you have is you have what I call a green zone, which would be this right here and maybe including this. And then outside of that, moving into these what are called standard deviations, right? A certain amount of percentage outside of the range, you have what's called the red zone, which is the critical zone. That's so when you look at a blood test panel, you're going to have, let me go back to this, okay? So see here over in this column, you have these reference intervals. Those are the reference ranges. And if you're in between these numbers, you're within the green zone. But if you're outside of those numbers, then you are out in what I call the red zone, right? So let's go back to this screen. Now, in functional medicine or functional nutrition, we have what are called green, yellow, red, and code blue. Now this is kind of the opposite. Like it's not the best example. Maybe I can pull up a better example for you. So, all right, look at this right here, right? This bell curve. And this is talking about test scores, but this goes with anything that has ranges, right? So here's your average. This says average range, but think of it more as optimal range, right? And then this would be um, above the average range, but not like critical. And this is below the average range, again, not critical. These would be what we would call the yellow zones, all right? And then outside of that, we have what we call the red zones, all right? We don't want to be too far. We don't want to be too far to the left. We don't want to be too far to the right. Like we kind of want to be in that central zone, right? All right. So, when you let's go back to the blood test here. Okay, so this is a panel on a man about he's about 44 years old, and he has a history of anxiety. He's also on hormone replacement, on testosterone therapy, and he did a lab test with his Kaiser doctor, and they with Kaiser, their panels are very minimal. Like they don't do very extensive panels. They do very cursory panels. Usually the minimum they have to, because their goal is to save money. That's they're not going to tell you that, but that is their goal, right? They're an insurance company. Everything is about like cost effectiveness. The problem is it leaves a lot of detail out because you running fewer tests does not give you better answers. Sometimes you have to run more tests. I'm not saying you have to run like every test on the planet, but you do need to think about things more comprehensively, right? So when he came to me, he was complaining of on his Kaiser test that his creatinine levels had gone from, he normally is in the like point 0.9 90 points, right? And he was above 100. It's basically it's 1 point something. 1 point, I think he was 1.12. and he was very concerned about it, right? He's thinking, oh my God, like he had a friend who died of either developed kidney problems or died of it, and he's a bit of a he's very OCD, so he panics very easily. So we just ran another blood panel on him, right? And I ran a more comprehensive panel. So on this panel, I ran a full CBC, and the reason why I did that, it was also saying that they found that his red blood cells and his hematocrit, which is the thickness of the blood, they were high. They were on the high side. So, and I'm sorry I don't have that panel to show you, but this is his. This panel I ran after I made recommendations on what I saw. So when he brought in his initial results, what I did was I recommended, because he's on testosterone therapy, it's very common for people to end up, for their blood to get thicker while they're on testosterone therapy. So I recommended that he do therapeutic phlebotomy. Just go to the blood bank and do therapeutic phlebotomy, or find, get a prescription for it, right? And that's where they draw blood, but they don't do it with the intent of using it for blood transfusions. They just do it to get excessive red blood cells, excessive iron, and thickness, addressed, right? They do it a lot for conditions like hemochromatosis, which is an inherited disease where you do not break down and eliminate iron out of your body the way a normal person does. Most of us, we're excreting iron so that we don't store too much, because iron is actually a heavy metal, and it's very reactive. It creates a lot of free radicals when it's by itself. So it has to be conjugated or bound to proteins to keep it stable. And our body normally does this by turning it into something called ferritin. Ferritin is another test that doctors don't commonly test. And I run it on anybody or on anybody that comes in my clinic, because oftentimes it's never been ran, and many times we find it high or low, and it leads to, like it can give us an early warning marker to head off potential disease processes, or just dysfunctions, right? So if it's low, then usually that person is on their way to being anemic, iron deficient anemia. If it's high, it means that they're storing too much iron and they're developing a lot of systemic inflammation, and that can cause cardiovascular stress and even like the potential for stroke or kidney or liver damage, right? So if you catch it early, then you'll avoid all those problems. You can basically take a preventative approach, right? Anyway, I went ahead and I ran this. We did the phlebotomy, right? And I ran this panel. I wanted to see if his red blood cells fell back into a normal range, and they did. They're all within the ranges here. They're a little bit on the higher end. Like his RBCs are 5.52. The top end is 5.80, which actually that's a pretty good number. Hemoglobin 16.5. Top end of that is 17.7. Hematocrit 49.7. Top end is 51.0. So he's going to probably end up needing to do another therapeutic phlebotomy session. I'll probably have him do that in 4 weeks and get that level down to, more like into that bell curve, right? All of his other numbers are, in pretty good place. Functionally, I like to see, so the neutrophils are the white blood cells that battle bacterial infections typically, or acute injuries. In his case, he had neither that he was aware of. He had no acute injury, and he wasn't dealing with an infection. Sometimes we will see these numbers high in the case of something called dysbiosis, which is an imbalance in the bacteria of the intestines, and that can cause chronic issues down the road. I'm not going to get into it today, but if I see these neutrophils above 60, I start to be suspicious of some kind of like infectious condition, like a bacterial overgrowth or something like that, right? Oftentimes it's somebody getting over a respiratory infection, but sometimes it's like I'm correct where it's dysbiosis, or like an H. pylori infection in the stomach, right? That can be another thing. His lymphocytes are, within a good, they're at a good level. I like to see them no higher than 40. When they get above 40, that can be an indication of something viral, either like a cold or flu, COVID, or it can be something more insidious like a chronic, like a herpes simplex 1 infection outbreak. It could be Epstein-Barr, that's a common one. Cytomegalovirus, these are all in the herpes family. It doesn't mean you have herpes. It just means that this virus is kind of like running amok behind the scenes, causing the immune system to be troubled, right? And it's something that can lead to things like adrenal fatigue, fibromyalgia, brain fog, etc. So, many times I will look for that in those situations. Uh, looking looking at his um, looking at his kidney markers, BUN, that's blood urea nitrogen. That's a byproduct of protein breakdown. And creatinine is another byproduct of protein breakdown. Creatinine is a more sensitive marker for kidney function. BUN rises and falls with like working out and protein consumption, right? And so does creatinine, but not quite as acutely as BUN. Both of them are well within range, and you can see that his creatinine's back in the 90s, which is where he wanted them to be, which is where they are. His glucose did show above normal high, like ideally, like so the lab range is 70 to 99. I'll tell you right now, I like to see it no higher than 95. It can be an indication of emerging insulin resistance, which is the pre-stage of pre-diabetes and then eventually diabetes, right? So we want really good insulin sensitivity and glucose control. Um, he was under a lot of stress, so his cortisol could have been high, and that could have been, the reason for this. He did fast for the required 12 hours. So realistically, this number should have been lower, but again, because he's stressed, he could have been, in a catabolic state, breaking down and turning skeletal muscle into blood sugar. Okay, and then his alkaline phosphatase was out of range. Alkaline phosphatase is an enzyme that gets released when certain tissues break down. Most commonly, it's in bone, and you'll see it a lot in children. A lot of times theirs will be out of range because they're turning bone over really fast. It's more concentrated in I want to say in intestinal tissue, brain, and a few other organs. But the normal range is 47 to 123. He's just 3 points out of range. I'm not going to sound the alarm with this, especially when his liver enzymes are well within normal range, and his LDH, lactic dehydrogenase, is also within normal range. I told him that we would retest this in like a month or two, and more than likely it's going to end up being back within the range. But we'll keep an eye on it. But yeah, okay. So that's the main thing I wanted to show you with this case. Now let's move to this next one. This is a female who's 55, and she she's never had a real comprehensive panel ran on her hormones. She's postmenopausal. We wanted to get a fix on, like, is she still postmenopausal? What are her hormone levels? So I ran luteinizing hormone. That's one of the hormones that goes to the ovaries. Follicle stimulating hormone. It's another one that goes to the ovaries. Follicle stimulating hormone triggers the release of the production of estrogen. Luteinizing hormone triggers the production of progesterone. Sorry. Now, DHEA is like the mother hormone to your steroid hormone. So your body, here's how it works. Your body comes down, it takes cholesterol from your liver, and it synthesizes this hormone here called pregnenolone. And then from there, it synthesizes DHEA. And then DHEA is turned into testosterone and then into estrogen. Pregnenolone is also turned into 17-hydroxyprogesterone. And then, of course, that gets turned to progesterone. And from there, it's turned into either aldosterone or cortisol, or it stays as progesterone, right? But most medical doctors do not test pregnenolone, nor do they test DHEA. And DHEA is one of your most critical stress hormones. You want, if you're in a stressful situation, if your cortisol is elevated, you want your DHEA elevated too, because what it does is it helps to prevent you from breaking down your own muscle and turning it into sugar. And you don't want that to happen, like not in a large amount. Like it, of course it's appropriate if you're stressed, right? Your body's got to break, it's got to get energy from somewhere. But chronic stress is where things tend to, kind of come unglued, and then we start to see these levels shift. I like to see DHEA definitely no higher than the lab range of 220.5. If we get above that, then we have to start looking at possible like downstream conversion problems. Maybe the enzymes that convert testosterone or estrogen are not working efficiently. So, or we've just got such a bad chronic stress reaction that level is elevated. The biggest thing I tend to find a problem in, and again, nobody ever tests for it, is pregnenolone deficiency. Um, the normal range isn't on here. Here it is, reference range below 151. Like as long as you're below 151, you're considered normal. I can tell you right now that's not true. The lowest end of the range is, if you don't even register, it's under 10 nanograms per deciliter. And I myself, when I did my own pregnenolone, it was it wasn't even registering. It was like below that 10, right? And I had all the symptoms of pregnenolone deficiency. She is only at 11. So likely she's having downstream, she doesn't have enough raw material here to produce downstream hormones. If we look at her cortisol levels are decent. Her prolactin levels are good. She doesn't need a lot of prolactin. She's not she doesn't need to produce breast milk, to feed a newborn child, right? That's what prolactin is for. Her estradiol levels are on the low end of normal for a postmenopausal woman, but they're adequate. You don't want them too high. Estradiol is a very aggressive estrogen. And let's see here. Let's look what else. There's progesterone. Her progesterone is subadequate. It doesn't even register. It's less than 0.1. It's the lowest you can be. We need to get her progesterone levels up, and usually that's going to be either like bioidentical hormone replacement, or what we can do is come up here and we can supplement bioidentical pregnenolone, and then recheck and see if her body starts to synthesize adequate amounts of progesterone in like a month or two, right? So we tested her insulin-like growth factor. This is basically when you secrete growth hormone, your body turns that into insulin-like growth factor in your liver, and this is what causes your tissues to grow, right? Her level is decent. Like as long as it's in the triple digits in the hundreds, then she's got probably adequate to maintain lean body mass. It could be a bit more optimized. I like to see it above about like 135, 150-ish. You definitely don't want it to get over this top number, and this changes all the time at the labs. Like every lab, the range is different. 220 is about the top end, and if it gets over 220, then the risk is if you have any kind of tumors in your body, they can start growing, and that's benign tumor, say like a fatty lipoma or something like that. But if it's cancerous, then even more of a problem, right? Not everybody is running around with a tumor that's going to grow, but if you have insulin-like growth factor levels that are too high for a while, you can start to see problems emerge. Generally, they got to be about 250 or more is usually where you're going to see people starting to like grow tumors. Although I haven't really seen it a whole lot, it's possible. I don't get too scared unless this is like in the 3s or 400s, right? That's when you got some big problems, and that can indicate like a pituitary tumor or some other like pathological condition. So anyway, now I want you to understand, like, do not take these numbers to heart. Like you have to look at things you know, from a clinical standpoint. And I'm sorry, I know I'm going all over the place with this. I will do another one of these, kind of going through like how to read like your general blood work, but don't look at this and go look back at your stuff and go, oh my God, like I've got these problems, right? You really need to talk to a trained clinician that knows how to look at this stuff and interpret it. But I want to give you insight. What I'm doing with this is giving you insight into what a more comprehensive blood panel looks like, and again the case history of the person that it pertains to. Okay, um, so going back into this. Okay, homocysteine. This is the next one. I absolutely recommend you check your homocysteine levels. It is one of the most common causes of idiopathic high blood pressure. And what I mean by that is when you have high blood pressure and the doctors go, oh, it's idiopathic, it means they don't know what's causing it. And then they're going to stick you on medications. I commonly see people with high homocysteine levels. And what high is anything above a 7. I consider it high. But definitely, like, once it hits around, like, in the teens, like, 10 and above, then it's definitely going to start causing some symptomatic issues. I myself had really extremely high homocysteine. It was like 20 point something or 22, and I had severely high blood pressure. It's a simple fix. It's what it is you have a gene that affects your ability to methylate and to break this down. And all you have to do is take methylated B vitamins and sometimes something called trimethylglycine or phosphatidylcholine, and it will give you adequate amounts of methylation to break down homocysteine and bring it back to a normal level. But you'll never know unless you run the blood test. And by the way, if the level is high, it definitely means you have like probably like the MTHFR gene variant or MTRR, one of the methylation genes, okay, or multiple. But I highly recommend you test this. You got to test it at least once, just to make sure that you're not, you don't have that gene, and that you're not at risk of developing high blood pressure. The other thing that high homocysteine leads to, it's a marker for risk of Alzheimer's and stroke. So any cardiovascular like disease is more probable with a high homocysteine level. So I recommend you check it regularly, minimum once a year, minimum. All right. And then, okay, going into this patient. Okay, so remember I told you this is a female patient, and what I say her age was, she's 55. All right. Now look here. This is something that gets missed all the time. She has hypothyroid. She was diagnosed hypothyroid, but I don't think they ever tested her for thyroid antibodies. And this is the most common reason why women, especially, have hypothyroidism, is because they have this autoimmune condition called Hashimoto's. And she happens to have Hashimoto's disease. And that's because her immune system is attacking her own thyroid. Now, medically, they'll try to address this with corticosteroids. What is it called? I'm sorry, it's an oral steroid. I keep saying I want to say pregnenolone, but that's not what it is. Anyways, methoxy, solumedrol, dexamethasone, prednisone. Sorry, prednisone is the steroid that they'll use a lot to try to address this, because what they're trying to do is suppress the inflammatory response. I do not recommend doing that. You'll screw up your other adrenal hormones, including your steroid hormones. Um, you can use anti-inflammatory enzymes like bromelain and papain to help decrease the inflammation response naturally. And then there used to be a product called it was a Metagenics product, and I'm sorry it's not coming to me, but I used to use it a lot along with bromelain to reduce this. Now I use a product from Orthomolecular called soft tissue inflammation. It's basically these packets of multiple nutrients and you take them all at the same time, and it will squash any kind of inflammatory response in your body, and it does it naturally without any side effects. So I use that a lot now. And then I will use like some standard process thyrotrophin PMG to help repair the thyroid, and does a pretty good job. And then sometimes you can knock this completely into remission. Sometimes you kind of have to stay on the supplements to keep it under control. Vitamin D is another critical thing. You have to make sure you have adequate amounts of vitamin D. Speaking of which, let's take a look and see if we measured that in this panel. I don't think that we did. I don't remember why not. Maybe because it was already done on another test. But that would be a really good thing to add to a panel. I would test your vitamin D regularly, especially if you come up low. Um, the lab range for vitamin D is anywhere from 30 to 100. The ideal, like the healthy range, in my opinion, is between about like 60 to 80. That's your prime optimal zone. And most people are well below that. Like, a lot of people are writing about like 30, 27. Those are subadequate. Those are subadequate levels. You need a lot of vitamin D in your system. You don't want too much, because too much can cause problems too, right? But you definitely need plenty of vitamin D because it's a hormone and your body uses it to synthesize other hormones. It's super important for your immune system. It strengthens your immune system, stabilizes it, it keeps it healthy, keeps it from going out of control and creating autoimmune diseases. So I would strongly recommend putting it in your panel. And finally, what we have here, C-reactive protein. This is another cardiovascular inflammation marker, and hers is 1, which is within the range. But I can tell you, like I like to see this below 1. Like, to me, that's optimal. 1 to 3 is like subclinical high. Um, you may or may not show any signs of systemic or cardiovascular inflammation. If you're there, then your next move is going into like a critical zone, right? So once you're above 3, you're in the critical zone, and you're just going to have more health problems from there. So again, while hers is 1, not in crisis, but definitely not like optimal, right? And finally, her sex hormone binding globulin levels are below normal low. This is because what's happening is sex hormone binding globulin stabilizes your sex hormones, right? Progesterone, testosterone, estrogen, right? It stabilizes them, keeps them from getting broken down, because if they float free, they get broken down very quickly. So your body stabilizes them to keep the levels optimized, and then as it needs that hormone, it releases it from this binding globulin. When the hormones are subadequate, your body will decrease sex hormone binding globulin in order to release more free hormone into the tissues. That's the reason why her levels are low, because her body is, again, it's looking for it wants more progesterone. In her case, it needs more progesterone. It's looking for it, and that's why her levels are low. So, all right. So let's move over to a quick one. This is a gentleman. He's 48 years old. Problems with fatigue. He doesn't recover from training quickly anymore. He's having sleep problems and having a little bit of like anxiety, depression. Classic symptoms of low testosterone. He had his levels checked by Kaiser. When he checked them at Kaiser, I think they came up at like 29. So we rechecked it through our lab, and he was at 156, well below the normal low, the range of 264 to 916. I can tell you about the optimum level of testosterone in just about anybody is around about 600. Some people can get away with less, but I think 600 is a nice area to be. It's not too high, it's not too low. It's just like right in the middle. It's kind of Goldilocks, right? His estrogen levels are within normal range, because sometimes guys they have high estrogen, and their testosterone may not be like critically low, but if it's low enough, the estrogen to testosterone ratio gets knocked off balance, and they can manifest low testosterone symptoms because they're what's called estrogen dominant. He's definitely estrogen dominant, and he's got the signs because he's got, larger male breasts, not huge. He doesn't have gynecomastia, but he's got male breast tissue, right? And he's very heavy around his midsection, which is classically where guys will store it, especially if they're estrogenic. I recommended testosterone therapy. He ended up using an online place because we weren't doing it yet through our clinic. So he's doing pretty well. I haven't seen a follow up from him. He hasn't been back in our clinic. I think he's been doing labs through the online place, probably like TRT Nation or something like that. I recommended a few to him at the time, but now we do this in our clinic, so this is something that we do see regularly. It's very common. Guys as young as 30, but probably the typical age is anywhere from 35 to 45 is where we'll see it. And then, of course, older men who've never been, consulted about it, right? Okay, this next one is a gentleman, 66 years old. He was having problems with, he was getting spontaneous fractures of the long bones in his feet, the metatarsals. They were spontaneously fracturing, and he was having a lot of pain in his hip and in his shoulder. And so he was under a lot of stress too, which he did not mention at the time. But then we ran this panel on him, and you see he's got a number of markers that are out. Like he was basically diabetic. All right, his hemoglobin A1C was above 6.4, which is the minimum level for diabetes. Obviously, his fasting blood glucose was a little high. Kidney markers were good. Sodium potassium levels were a little low, which is usually that's a sign of adrenal stress. And then coming down, magnesium was actually high, which is unusual, and that's serum magnesium. So I don't acknowledge that as much as I do like magnesium RBC, which is the magnesium attached to your red blood cells. I think that's a better marker for magnesium status. His GGT, which is an enzyme that gets released when your gallbladder is malfunctioning, it was high. It was, the range is to the high end 65. He's at 92, so he's got gallbladder disease. By the way, he's a heavy drinker, so liver enzymes aren't catastrophically high, but I would call these functionally high. Like when they get above about 20 to 25, I consider those like I know there's some liver stress of some kind. Again, not catastrophic, but definitely some signs of stress, right? Look at his ferritin levels, 613. This is what I was talking about. Like if I see liver enzymes elevated, and that GGT right there, we come down and we look, and also cholesterol, right? If his cholesterol's high, which is what his doctors were saying, like they had him on cholesterol meds. His cholesterol was high. See, this is high right here is VLDL, but nobody bothered to test his ferritin or address it. This is an extremely toxic level of ferritin. This causes a lot of systemic inflammation. It will always drive your cholesterol higher. It will mess up your blood sugar. It'll mess up your hormones. It wrecks everything. So this is a top priority. When I find this, I address it immediately. I had him go out and give blood at the blood bank to get his levels down. And I don't have a follow-up because unfortunately, a lot of times people come in and we do these initial panels and they do what I tell them to do, but then they don't come back and follow up and rerun a panel. Or he may have like done a panel through Kaiser. I don't recall. I think that may have been what it is, and unfortunately he didn't send it over to me. So I don't have that to show you, but again, these are kind of off the cuff case reviews, right? So let's see here. I don't want to go too long on this video. CSC reactive protein is 3.39. So remember I was telling you when it gets above that, systemic inflammation, cardiovascular. Look at his homocysteine, 11.3. He has a methylation problem. I put him on methylated B vitamins and on trimethylglycine, brought that right down. It did, and it also helped his blood pressure. He was on high blood pressure meds, by the way. Wink, right? Got his blood pressure down. I think we got him off his meds. No signs of autoimmune thyroid. Look at his vitamin D, 28.6, below normal low. Here's that range I was telling you about, 30 to 100. I put him on high dose vitamin D. I think I put him on like 50,000 IUs a week to try to get him up, get his levels up pretty quickly. Sometimes I'll do it daily, like 5 to 10,000 units a day, and then we'll retest pretty quickly, like within about a month, and check these levels because they'll come up really fast on some people, and I don't want to overdrive them, but I want to get them up fast because a lot of times they're in crisis when they're low like that. One of the common signs and symptoms of low vitamin D, by the way, is muscle aches, body fatigue, a brain fog, brain fog. So vitamin D can fix a lot of that stuff sometimes. And then going down, okay, so these red blood cell markers, MCV, MCH, MCHC, when these are abnormal, they're almost always a sign of poor methylation. Usually, patients require methylated B vitamins to bring this back into balance. And let's see here, hormone levels. His DHEA was super low because he was so chronically stressed and he had so much inflammation. And PSA levels were within normal limits, I believe. Yeah, he was good. Let's see, testosterone on the low end of normal. I didn't recommend testosterone therapy. Um, I think we put him on. I think we put him on like some supplements, like some Tribulus, to help his body like bring it back online. It was either that or Shilajit. Shilajit's a good supplement to help naturally boost testosterone levels. So I think I did that with them, and we were just checking him for, like really, really progressive diabetes, which he didn't have. Insulin like growth factors really low. Like yeah, he doesn't have a lot of muscle, and so I like what I was gonna consider doing eventually once we got his blood sugar and everything like more in balance. I was going to consider putting him on some growth hormone secretagogues like ipamorelin or tesamorelin, which will help boost your own production of growth hormone. I probably wouldn't have put him on right now because he's diabetic and it can increase the risk for diabetes. But later on, like when he was in a better place, I probably would have suggested it, but we never did. All right. So I'm not going to go into these panels. I'll probably do it another time. So let me go into some genetic testing, okay? Because I've mentioned it in this. So let's briefly show you what this kind of looks like. So you can take your genetic data. In this situation, this person had, they had their DNA tested at, I think it was Ancestry or 23andMe. Those are the legacy providers. You can take that data and you can go to places like Genetic Genie and NutraHacker, and you can run what's called your genome profile. In this case, this is a methylation profile. And what you're seeing here are some very, very key genes that affect methylation. So you've got COMT, you've got your VDR, which is for vitamin D. You've got MAO, MTHFR. Remember I mentioned that earlier. MTRR, MTR, and then BHMT, that stands for betaine, BHMT, betaine something methyl transferase, and then CBS. All the Schmidt gene, these are all critical for something called methylation. You see the reds, those are the most critical ones, and then the yellows are like less critical. Like they basically mean that yellow means that the gene is half, you've inherited a deficiency or a change from one of your parents but not the other, and red means you got it from both of them, right? And when it doesn't mean that the gene is suboptimal. A lot of times they are, but sometimes they work too well. It makes them work too much, right? So you can get one way or the other. And the key thing is to match it up with symptoms that you're experiencing. And so when we run these profiles, we give our patients a questionnaire, what we call a gene symptom questionnaire, and it has categories and it will match, to see like which genes may be causing problems, right, functionally. And then we'll do things to clean them up, kind of like with myself. I put myself on supplements and then I changed my diet a little bit, and I had to modify my exercise for a little while. I had to do a lot of repair on my mitochondria because I was so inflamed from having low methylation and too much histamine in my system and poor detoxification that I had a lot of mitochondrial damage systemically. And so I think like one of the things I ended up taking to fix that was methylene blue and NAD injections, and that helped too, right? But the biggest thing was the methylation. Like I just took methylated B vitamins, trimethylglycine, phosphatidylcholine, and SAMe. And the SAMe helped with like methylation in my brain, whereas the other things help methylation in the body, right? Coming over here, NutriHacker not only shows you those same gene SNPs, those polymorphisms, but it explains like CBS. It tells you like what it does, right? And then if that gene is malfunctioning, what it leads to, like in this case, increased responsiveness to homocysteine lowering effects of folic acid, marginally increased disposal of homocysteine, right? And then the nutrient you need to take in order to support that gene, you know, to help it function optimally, and so on and so forth, right? MTHFR, MTRR, Schmidt genes, Schmidt 1. What are the other ones? We've got some detox genes, right? This, the CYP family of genes, CYP, you know, 1A2, CYP2D6, CYP3A4, the GSTP1, this is a detox gene, and so on and so forth, right? Because they're free reports, they do not cover every possible SNP or scenario, but they're a good place to start. You get a lot of really critical information, and just starting here, you can clean up a lot of genetic problems by, you know, just starting here and working on these. However, we go more in depth. Like we use services such as My Happy Genes or 3x4 or Self Decode to go even more extensively into these genes, like doing a deeper dive. So anyway, I think I'm going to conclude that for today. I'm sorry, I know it's a lot of information, but hopefully you got something from this and you understand better kind of, number one, what we do in our wellness center, and then number two, what to look for when it comes to doing, you know, blood testing, laboratory testing, and DNA testing. Because this right here, my friends, is the way of the future. Like I guarantee you, everybody will do their DNA test at some point or another, because you only have to do it once. You have your genetic blueprint, and then from there, you know what genes need to be supported, and you'll know, like, you'll get an idea of like symptomatically when those genes are being like overloaded, and therefore like when to support them and how to support them, right? And that is like the bedrock of health. I don't believe you can truly be healthy unless you address your functional genomics first. Then you get into like the blood work, you know, you like hormone optimization, and you know, like, you know, cleaning up, you know, chronic infections and things like that. You can do them at the same time, but if you do not address your gene pathways, your methylation, detox, histamine pathways, as you start to deal with other things, say like you got like a chronic infection, as you address that, these pathways are going to become a problem. Like if you cannot detox properly, you're going to suffer more side effects from doing proper treatment. Because when you kill, you know, bacteria and parasites, they release a lot of endotoxins, and that ultimately has to be processed by your genes, by the enzymes that these genes produce. If you are not, you know, if these pathways are not optimized, you're going to sustain what they call in functional medicine, or in the nutrition world, holistic nutrition, they call it Herxheimer reactions. You're going to be more likely to have those reactions. So clean up your gene pathways, look at your blood work, you know, run things like organic acids tests and things like that. I'll go into those in other videos, okay? Anyway, thank you so much for looking at this. If you've been here this whole time, you obviously were very interested. I hope you learned a lot from it, and I promise I will bring you even more information, and I will break this stuff down. Do me a favor. You're looking at this, whatever platform you're looking at this through, whether it's TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, like this video, subscribe to our channel, and then comment. If you've got specific things that you want, you know, us to bring, put it in the comment section, you know, and be nice. All right. We'll take constructive criticism. If there's something you didn't like, be nice about it. Don't be a hater, but definitely, like, leave comments. We want the interaction, and look forward to bringing, to doing our next video with you. All right. Take care, and we will